Hey friends, it's Spence. Today I will be sharing with you my August reading wrap-up. I read a total of 9 books for the past month. Some of them I read for Wikathon, which is a month-long readathon during the month of August where we highlight Filipino authors, and there are a few others that are not part of that readathon. The first book that I read was Perfect on Paper by Sophie Gonzalez. This was actually highly recommended by one of my friends, Mark, particularly because this is a book with very good bisexual representation. In this book, we follow our main character, Darcy Phillips, who runs this small secret business of hers at school where she has access to a certain locker, Locker 89. And people leave their contact information and their relationship problems in like pieces of paper in Locker 89. And then within a few days, she's going to respond with like relationship advice, which she has kind of learned through many years of, being fascinated by how relationships work. This was a 5-star read. This was so well written. And I loved all the characters. They were so endearing. And this just was such a cute, heartwarming story. It has, of course, it's like more dramatic, emotional moments. But it was just a beautiful romance. This book honestly made me rethink, maybe I do really love contemporary. And maybe I do love romance. My next read was also a 5-star read. And that is Medicaid and the Ocean of Stars by Carice Avendaño Cruz. This was my first read for Wikathon, and this is actually an arc. The book comes out in October. And you guys, you need to pre-order this book. I'm not even on a marketing team for this book, but I want every middle grade reader to read this book just because it's such a beautiful middle grade fantasy. In this book, we follow our main character, Mariquit, who is poor. Her father and brother are deceased because of a boating accident that happened many years ago. And now she only lives with her mute mother, who is really good at sewing. Like the entire village that they live in, or the barangay that they live in, goes to her for their sewing needs or their costumes and clothes and whatnot. But for some reason, just because they're super poor, Marikit has never had a beautiful dress in her life. But since her birthday is approaching, she's kind of hoping that maybe this will be the day that her mom will finally sew her a beautiful blue dress that will make her look like a diwata, or the Filipino equivalent of a fairy. So yeah, this book is unapologetically Filipino. Everything about it, the fantasy elements, the culture, of course the characters are Filipino, but I really loved how you could tell that Cruz really wrote this book for mainland Filipinos, those who really grew up with that background. And this is a book that I wish I'd had when I was younger, and I want every Filipino kid to read this book just because you kind of get a deeper appreciation of our mythology, our lore, our culture, the tall tales that your local gossips tell. Everything about this book is just so Filipino, and maybe I'm not the best person to say this, but I think this is still accessible for those who are not Filipino, and they can really get an appreciation for Filipino mythology and fairy tales. Other than that, this has such great characters, a lot of really heartwarming moments, and just so many parts that really tugged at my heartstrings. So 5-star read. The next book is also a 5-star read, although this is kind of with the footnote that this is actually a children's book and it's really short. That is My Shadow is Purple. So this was written by Scott Stewart, and this is basically his love letter to non-binary and gender non-conforming kids. And that's really all I'm gonna say because it's a super short book. But it was so beautiful and such an affirming piece of literature for any kid out there who has felt that they're not quite a girl or a boy. The next book that I read is another arc, and that is Stolen City by Eliza A. Bonin. So I read Dauntless, which is Eliza Bonin's debut from, I think, last month. And I really loved it. It took me until up to the middle before I really gained an appreciation for it. And by the end, I was hooked. I loved it absolutely. But this book, it just wasn't my cup of tea. This book is basically, it's very different from Dauntless. So this story is set in the city of Lethon, a city that's been colonized by the Empire. It's an adult fantasy, and we follow our main characters who are twin thieves, Aryan and Liam. And then one day, this mysterious guy named Kavar approaches them, and he's like, "Hey, I have a job for you. Can you retrieve this artifact?" And this artifact is significant to Aryan and Liam's past, particularly their mother. And so they take on this heist job, I guess. But then as the story continues, they realize that there's so much more to this artifact and to the politics of the city, that they're not just reclaiming that artifact, but also reclaiming their place in their city, which has been stolen by colonizers. I just did not connect with this story. I found the writing I really struggled with the writing. I think I struggled also in Dauntless at the beginning with Eliza Bonin's writing, although I did kind of get used to it. It's definitely an acquired taste, I would say, and with this book, I definitely did not vibe with this, added to the fact that I really did not find the story all that intriguing. There were still a lot of great moments, don't get me wrong. There were a lot of magical moments, and it had better moments, right? But overall, I felt just very okay with this book. It's a nice book, and I really loved how everything wrapped up, especially at the end. Those were some solid last few chapters. But at the same time, I also feel like I just did not read this at the right time, so I'm definitely going to give it a go once I receive my physical copy. The next book that I read is the first volume of Trece, which is, I think, Murder on Ballet Drive. I didn't realize this until I started reading it, but each volume of Trece is actually a compilation of 4 cases. So each case is something that the main character, Alexandra Trece, tries to solve with regards to, like, basically the monsters and the mythological creatures that haunt Manila in the Philippines. And I really love this. I absolutely love the art style in this book, and also the stories in general. I don't think I quite connected with the characters or the main character. Maybe that's something that will happen eventually in future volumes. But I just love the lore. I just love seeing the horrific side of Philippine mythology laid out in an urban setting, and it was really cool. So yeah, I'm definitely going to read the rest of the Trece volumes. And then another 5-star read after that is Patron Saints of Nothing by Randy Ribay. This is basically the story of a Filipino-American teenager who learns that his cousin, who was living in the Philippines, who he used to be close with, died. And upon further investigation, he learns that his cousin died due to Duterte's war on drugs. Duterte is our former president, and he had this really intense drug war, and a lot of innocents were killed. And I really loved the message of this story with regards to the value of human life. Like, it doesn't matter if someone is innocent or guilty of using or pushing drugs, they still have the right to life and rehabilitation, of course. This story, it has such a huge impact on me that I can't even put to words. Even now, I still feel, some lingering pain from how absolutely heartbreaking this story was because it hits so close to home. Also, Randy Ribay is such an immaculately talented writer. Like, holy crap, this book was written so well. It was such a page turner. I loved how well developed the characters are and how well fleshed out they are. They're so nuanced, and no one is ever completely demonized. Like, the characters' flaws are shown, but you kind of understand where they're coming from, sort of a thing. And I just absolutely love this, and am definitely going to read anything else that Randy Ribay puts out. The next book that I read was kind of a disappointment, and that is Before Ever After by Samantha Soto. So after I finished Patron Saints of Nothing, I was like, okay, I'm kind of depressed right now. I need something to be a little more uplifting, so I'm going to read a romance by a Filipino author too. And Before Ever After is, I really didn't know anything before getting into it, which was probably a mistake because yes, it is a romance, but it's also kind of it's more of a magical realism story. So in this book, our main character is Shelley, and her husband just died in a freak car accident. And then, so she's like super sad because she loved her husband, she had a great relationship with him. And then after a few days, someone shows up at her door, and it looks exactly like her husband, but a little different. Upon talking to this person, she finds out that this person is apparently her husband's grandson. And so he's also confused because his grandfather just died, and now they're just trying to piece together who really was the main character's husband and the other character's grandfather, and trying to figure out his real identity and how this all came to be, sort of a thing. Here's the thing about this book. There's a lot to love about it. Like, the writing is really good. Samantha Soto can really write. Like, she writes so well. The story is really interesting and really intriguing. And you can tell that there's a lot of thought put into this because there are a lot of like historical elements blended into it. This was a genre blending story in general. But the thing is, at the end of the book, I appreciated it, but at the same time, I was just like, I don't love this book. I was just like, I did not really enjoy that. I really didn't really vibe with it. Like, I know it's quality, and I know that there are a lot of merits to it. It's just a story that I did not particularly love, and did not connect with. So there's that. Would I recommend it? Absolutely, because it's an interesting story. It's just not something I loved. It's such a weird feeling to say that, but that's how I feel about it. Actually, let me know down in the comments if there ever was a book that made you feel the same way. Like, you get why people love it, it's just that it's not for you, sort of a thing. The next book that I read is Ghost Cloud by Michael Mann, and this is a debut middle grade fantasy. This was also an arc that I got from NetGalley, and I love the cover, so that's why I basically signed up for it. In this book, we follow our main character, Luke Smith Sharma. He's half Indian, half white. For the longest time, he's basically been in child labor with a bunch of other kids shoveling coal for this evil woman named Tabitha. And they're basically in underground London. Their work is basically to keep the power running above ground. One day, another kid named Jess arrives at the station, and our main character Luke saves her from like a blunder that could have cost her life. And so they're sent away to a different part of the station, and there Luke starts to realize that he's seeing things that other kids aren't, and those are some ghostly things. So he befriends this ghost named Alma, and basically they figure out that things are really not as they seem in the power station. This was a very okay book. Like, I love the characters. It had its really cute, heartwarming, and heart-wrenching moments. The magic is really cool. But it was okay. It never really came to a point where I was just like, I love this book so much. It was just an okay book. That's all I have to say about it. Yeah, I was gonna try to get into more detail, like the writing, the story, characters, plot, magic. But yeah, they were just okay. The last book that I read was Yes to Life in Spite of Everything by Viktor E. Frankl. So Viktor E. Frankl is the author of the well-beloved Man's Search for Meaning. If you guys aren't aware of that, it's basically him recounting his experiences as a Jewish prisoner in Nazi Germany. And he also happens to be a psychologist, so he was really able to delve into how much impact his experience has had on him, but also how he and a lot of other survivors were able to mentally cope with the horrors of the time. I like this book, but it did not have the same impact on me as Man's Search for Meaning did. This was basically just a collection of lectures that Viktor E. Frankl had given about the meaning of life and how we should embrace suffering and that sort of thing. And at the beginning, I was actually highlighting a lot of parts, but towards the end, I just was like, it's not really adding anything new that I didn't already learn from Man's Search for Meaning. So I definitely check out Man's Search for Meaning and say that you can read this too if you want, but it's not required reading, so to speak. But yeah, those are all the books that I read for August. Sorry if I am not necessarily in the most jolly, enthusiastic mood or the most exciting mood. I don't know. But yeah, let me know down below in the comments your favorite read of last month. And if you've read any of the books that I mentioned, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.